Okay, here's a little tutorial on a Honda Ruckus carburetor. NPS 50, and it's a key-in carburetor. Just going to be a little quick disassembly and cleaning and put back together. First, note where all of your devices are sitting and how they're hooked up. That's probably one of the most important things. Then start disassembly. This is the electric idle mixture. This is the throttle position sensor. And when you do everything like this, take it and stack it in specific areas so you know exactly where it's at. Okay, here's the fuel diaphragm that's going to be connected to the slide. There's a spring right under this cap. Typically when there's a spring, I whack them, break them loose a little bit, and then very carefully remove it. See, there's your spring, there's your diaphragm. The diaphragms are very tender, so you have to really watch what you're doing there. Pull the spring out, put it right with that unit. Diaphragm, you're going to want to pick the diaphragm loose all the way around. Be careful not to let it hook up and tear on anything. Then you're going to lift your slide out, and there is your main jet on the side of the slide. So let's take this and stack it over here. Everything goes together. Next is going to be your bowl. Typically those bowls can be very, very tough sometimes. Put a lot of pressure on it before I hit the driver drill. That way they come out nice and clean. Bowl is the same way. I typically whack it with a screwdriver to loosen the seal. Not too much, just a little. There's your bowl. Really doesn't look too terribly bad. Bowl screws. Here is your float assembly pin. Sometimes your needle valve's stuck. If it is, you really got to be careful or you'll break those little tabs under there. There's your needle valve. Make sure these aren't cracked. If they have any cracks in them, they'll fill up with fuel and flood your carburetor. Okay, next are your jets. And this one here is kind of an odd one because if it's open, I typically try not to mess with it, but this doesn't just unscrew, this pulls out. It's swedged into a bore. So let's go for the jets and see how tight they are. You also have to be very careful with them. Hold on just a minute. I'm going to take this one jet out. This one's normally not too bad, and it's not. And when you're removing these, be extremely careful to check your bore. Every time you pull something out of a bore, shine a light down in there and look. There may be a washer, there may be an O-ring. Anything like that can really mess you up if you're not being real careful. Now that jet is tight. So if you hold on a minute, I'm going to grab another tool. Okay, we're back. Typically I try to use one of these drill center guides for a bit because they fit around there, and they're, when you put the blade in there and drop this sleeve over, it kind of has a tendency to help guide that jet. I give them a few little taps. Helps guide that jet and stops it from coming apart, because they will twist the top right out of those. Okay, again, I'm going to be very forceful with this down, and it came loose just fine. So here's the cap that sits on top of the main jet, and the main jet, you have to turn this over and use a smaller driver to go inside and push the jet out. It's right down inside of that bore. You have to push it out past, because it's got a little bit of an interference fit, but it will come out pretty easy. There she is. And these are what you're really concerned with, these little tiny holes all around here. And your centers, make sure there's no corrosion back and forth. Both of these jets are the same, very tiny holes. They're not the same, rather they're a little different configuration, but this one has a very tiny hole through the bore. You have to be real careful to make sure that one is open. Generally I use brake parts cleaner spray. I don't use it on any of the rubber parts. If you put it on a rubber part, throw the part away, as it gets into the rubber and messes it up. Anyway, those are the two jets. Then there's another jet, not a jet, but a needle valve right here, and that is a D-shaped screw. I'm going to try to make a little device to take that out. Usually I use tweezers, but I've done enough of them I need to do something else about it. So if you'll pardon me for a minute, I'll go make a tool. Well, it looks like I don't have the proper brass stock I was going to use to make that tool, so I'm going to go ahead and take it out. What you want to do before you take any of these mixture screws out anywhere, any carburetor, you want to note the position. Well, the way I usually do that is I will take this screw with a pair of tweezers, I will turn it in until it hits the bottom stop very lightly, and count how far I turn it in. Now these are typically about 2 5/8 of a turn. I just go half, 1, half 2, half 3, so forth. But anyway, count that down, then screw it all the way out and be careful underneath it. Okay, I spared you the pain of watching me unscrew this with tweezers. Very carefully remove it, look at it, make sure there's no parts left on it, and then, as I said before, always look in the bore. And I see some stuff down in the bore. So what are we going to have? It's more than likely going to be a spring. There's the spring. And then there's a washer. Very small washer that I can see down in there. There's the washer. Now, let's check the bore again. And in the very bottom of the bore, I see an O-ring. That O-ring has to come out. I'll make a small tool to reach in there and hook it and get it out, because these are a little bit too large. Anyway, before I unscrewed that, I did write down 1 7/8 turns out. So in other words, I turned it all the way to the bottom. Took me 1 7/8 turns to get to the bottom. Then I backed it all the way out. When I put it back in, I'll run it all the way to the bottom and then back it out 1 7/8 turns. That should be the proper factory setting for these. But you never know what somebody has changed. You're probably going to end up having to adjust it later. And what I'm going to do with this, now that I have it out and I don't have the stock I want, I'm going to take a very small saw and cut a slot right in the middle of this to fit a very small screwdriver, so that the adjustment after it's put in will be easy. Okay, let you go for a minute. Okay, we're back. I'm going to start cleaning the jets. Just for an example, I don't know if you can even see this tiny bit. That's what I typically have to use, and that's it compared to a sewing needle. So give you just some kind of a comparison. a little bit bigger than a hair, but on there's one of these jets, this one in particular here has a very, very tiny hole in it, and it gets plugged regularly, and the only way to get it out is to slip in there and try to use your bit very tenderly. You have to, because these things will come apart on you. They break as easy as you can possibly imagine. Even though they are drill bits, they still break very, very easily. Anyway, while I'm cleaning these, I'll spare you the boredom. This typically is the drill bit set that I use for that kind of stuff. Okay, I'll get the jets clean, then I'll be back. Okay, now that I got the jets all cleaned out, and for those of you wondering, this one small jet, the hole or size of the drill bit that I had to use in there was 14 thousandths of an inch. So it's really, really tiny. Anyway, now I'm on to cleaning the rest of the carburetor out. I'm going to take a brake clean and put it into every port and every jet, every hole, every connection, and make sure that all of those feed out, and make sure that they're all clean and they all go somewhere and they're not plugged internally. So if you do that, sometimes like on this idle jet, you can't squirt it. It won't go through one way, but it'll go through the other. So you have to pay attention to that. Make sure, I want you to make sure all ports are done and all ports are clean, then we start reassembly. As part of the reassembly, I always put the float and needle valve back into position, making sure everything is really clean. And then with the carburetor turned upside down, I blow through this port, see if I can actually get anything to blow through. Nothing there. And I turn it over with the floats down so the needle valve's open. Basically just testing the needle valve before I put the bowl back on. Okay, now I'm going to start the install of the diaphragm, the slide, and the main jet. I use a little tiny, very soft Scotch-Brite to make sure I clean everything off of there. Make sure everything's clear, clean. Make sure that little hole is open. Then when I install this, you drop the diaphragm in here. You can see where the location is by that ring there. Make sure it fits into your bore correctly and into the hole inside of the bore. It's got to go down in this jet right here. And when you get to that point, a lot of times what I'll do is take a device like this and I'll put it inside the bore. And that's going to hold the diaphragm up, and then when I fold the diaphragm over a little bit, it's going to stay in that position. I can take it like this. This is how I install them. Fold it down like that, slip that into the bore, put this little stop inside of here, set this in the correct position, push it down, make sure that that is in the proper area in the ring seal. Then put your spring in, take your cap, make sure your cap has got the spring retainer in the right spot, and push it all down at once, and don't go back the other direction. As soon as you push it down, pull your stop out, run the screw down, make sure not to release the pressure until your screw is in. If you do, it could cause that ring to come out, break the seal, then your main throttle won't work correctly. I hand tighten everything. I never go back with a drill driver tightening everything up. And then when you get done, make sure you reach in here and make sure your slide operates. You can see that slide, it'll go up and down on that spring. Operates just fine. So that's it for that section. Okay, the next thing I've done, since I didn't have the proper stock to make a tool, is I filed a very small screwdriver groove in the top of this little jet, and I'm now going to reinstall it. And when you're reinstalling this, make sure you go in the proper order. Your O-ring has to go in first, and when you put it in, look at your bore, look at the O-ring, make sure it's in place, and then you'll drop your washer on top of that and make sure that that's in place, and then your spring on top of that, make sure that's in place before you put your needle jet in. Okay, now I'm just going to simply reinstall the the position sensor, drop it on where it fits, and then rotate it, push it back a little bit to where the screw fits. You're going to feel a little pressure. That's just fine. Next item is your idle jet. Make sure that it's clean. Clean, clear, in she goes. Make sure your O-ring seats. Screw into position. You can change this after it's been mounted if you need to accommodate the wiring, but I generally aim it out about like that. I know where it's supposed to go, so that's it. Not a full rebuild. I didn't change any parts. I just cleaned everything and made sure it was all working.